Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to USVA SOL Review by Standard. I got to thank you for coming on back. I'm so glad that these videos are working out for you. I've seen a drastic improvement in student performance since these videos have been going out, and I really hope that you're utilizing them as much as you can. If you're at this standard, you're almost there. We're almost done reviewing. You're almost to the SOL. So good luck to you. And I hope these videos help you out. As for today, we're going to be taking a look at Standards 11A and B, which is pretty much the fighting in World War II. So we're going to be talking about the war in Europe before America enters, both the Allied and the Axis strategy, and then important battles of the war. So again, here we go with the standards. If you want to take a look at those, take a picture, whatever you need to do. Here's 11B, the start of it anyway. And the last part of 11B. So that's all the stuff we're going to do together today. And then we'll move on to something else next time. Alright, so let's begin with the war in Europe. So World War II begins with Hitler. It's going to start with Hitler, it's going to end with Hitler, at least in Europe anyway, after he invades Poland. The Soviet Union is also going to help them in Poland, and essentially Poland's going to crumble within a couple of weeks' time. Hitler, if you can remember from world history too, had been taking over back the Germanic lands, as he claimed them, the Sudetenland and all those, and Britain and France and the United States appease him by giving him what he wants, but they declare that if he invades Poland, they'll go to war with him, so they do. The United States does not. During the first 2 years, we officially stay neutral, while Germany completely takes over France, most of Europe, and continuously pounds Britain from the air, called the Battle of Britain. In mid-1941, Hitler is going to go against the Soviet Union, who he had aligned himself with. The Soviet Union joins the allies of Great Britain, France, and eventually the United States. Even though we have a strong isolationist sentiment here in the United States, we increasingly help Great Britain. We give them warships, we give them other supplies, we help them out in the Caribbean. We pass something called the Lend-Lease Act, which essentially gives the president authority to sell to whoever he wants, and that is not neutral one bit. He says in his famous quote that it's like lending a garden hose to a next-door neighbor whose house is on fire. Now, much of Britain was on fire due to the Battle of Britain and the firebombing that was taking place there. However, we were not helping places in Germany that were going through the same kinds of bombing. We were not helping the Soviet Union out as much as we may have liked to do. Again, helping out our main allies in Great Britain. Okay, let's talk about the war in Asia. During the 1930s, a militaristic and an imperialistic Japan invades Manchuria, and China takes over extremely easily, being the bigger power there. The United States, in a diplomatic and political stalemate, chooses to not recognize Japan's conquest in Asia and imposes an embargo on them, essentially stopping trade with Japan altogether to try and stop their mode of imperialism, which is oil and steel. Nothing happened at first, but obviously, as we know, Pearl Harbor is going to happen on December 7th, 1941. So while negotiating peace terms, all that kind of stuff, Japan sneak attacks us and attacks the naval base in Pearl Harbor, as I already mentioned. Kills several thousand Americans that were in Hawaii at the time. Hawaii, not a state yet, but we do have the naval base there. And that was the last major island on the way to America that Japan had not taken over yet. So it's a major, major issue for Japan and America at the time. And Roosevelt calls for Congress for a declaration of war and says famously, "A date that will live in infamy." After Pearl Harbor, when we declare war and the United States declares war on Japan, Hitler immediately declares war on us, and therefore we have fully entered a world war claiming the Americas, Asia, and now Europe as well. Okay, let's talk about the Allied strategy a little bit. America and its allies, Britain and the Soviet Union, follow a defeat Hitler first strategy. This is get Hitler done, get Hitler out of the way with, and then we'll take care of the Pacific. So most of our efforts go towards Europe in the first. In the Pacific, however, we are going to go to what is called an island hopping campaign, seizing one island at a time, putting all our efforts into one island, taking it back, and then moving on to the next island. This way we could cut off supplies coming into Japan, island by island, and hopefully completely starve them out of supplies, food, all that kind of stuff. All right. On the other side, the Axis strategy is for Germany to defeat the Soviet Union, gain control of all of their oil, and force Britain out of the war through a bombing campaign. They're just firebombing the cities and killing many civilians in their path. And then the Japanese are going to invade more islands and more countries in the Pacific Ocean, including the Philippines and Indonesia, and eventually goes after Australia and Hawaii. They don't take Hawaii, they don't take Australia, but they're hoping that America is going to lose a lot of its power in the sneak attack, and they do. However, once America is able to regain its strength, they do go after Japan pretty hard. Okay, let's talk about the major battles and any turning points that pop up in both Asia and Europe. So first, a little lesser known is what happens in northern Africa. It's a battle called El Alamein, and this is where German forces are trying to seize Egypt and the Suez Canal, but are defeated by the British. This prevents Hitler from gaining access to not only the Middle East, but also Africa in his quest for world domination. In Europe, there's a couple major turning points. Stalingrad is going to be the turning point in the Soviet Union. Stalingrad is the last stronghold that Russia and the Soviet Union have in World War II, and it prevented Germany from seizing the Soviet oil fields. This turns against the German tide in the east. This battle that the Soviets outlast the Germans, I wouldn't say win, but outlast the Germans in, is going to help them solidify and be able to regain their country back. In Normandy, late in the war, 1944, this is where this is D-Day. This is where D-Day happens. June 6th, 1944, that should say, not 1994. This is where we put all of our efforts in and storm the beaches, lose lots and lots of Allied men, mostly American soldiers, but definitely some British and Australian and Canadian forces, go storm the beaches, infiltrate the Nazi regime there in France, and eventually are able to push in from Western Europe. Dealing with the Pacific, there's a couple battles that we need to talk about. Midway is going to be the turning point in the Pacific War. This is where American naval forces are going to defeat a Japanese force that is much bigger than them, and it happens right after Pearl Harbor, and this allows them a jumping off point into their island hopping campaign. Both Iwo Jima and Okinawa are going to be pretty big landmark victories for us, as they're both going to be not only major victories in reclaiming those islands, getting closer to Japan, but also moral victories in winning wars battles that we probably should not have on paper. And then lastly, we're talking about ending the war in the Pacific, the use of the atomic bomb. Harry Truman and FDR before him have a secret weapon, and that is the atomic bomb, being made in the Manhattan Project, And his decision to use those bombs is going to change the world forever. He's going to bomb 2 cities in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tens of thousands of people are killed. Estimates go up to the 200,000 range, and it's just incredibly destructive. However, the thought is that the saving of Japanese and American lives in bombing those cities is why he dropped them in the first place. Rather than invade Japan, where the cost of human life would have definitely reached the high hundreds of thousands, he decides to completely destroy any lasting hope that Japan had. Okay, so for your activity today, why don't you go back through, watch the video one more time, and each time you do, I want you to jot down something, bullet points for each one of these battles or places of importance. So for Pearl Harbor, for example, you should probably write down that we're sneak attack, the date, and what that meant for us moving forward. That gets us into the war. So that would be those 2 bullet points right there. Not talking major things here. I would just really go through and make sure that you know what this information is that you just received. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is World War II, and that is the bulk of the fighting. Tune in next time to learn more about the home front and the minority people that are fighting in World War II. Talking about women, African Americans, Japanese Americans, things like that. We'll be getting into that much more next time. All right, we'll see you then.